So my research is primarily on ADHD, but you're going to see, I'm going to throw a bunch at you today. My goal here was to kind of throw all the different possibilities of things that might happen while I'm here because I'm new. And to some degree, my research is going to be shaped by the students and what sorts of things appear to be of interest to them, as well as opportunities that arise from being here in Spartanburg. So I've changed the title of this to a lot to study. It's so little time to study it. I'm at the beginning of my career and I'm already thinking, I just can't do it. I can't study it all before I have to retire. And I want to kind of have a little aside here. So before I was here, I was at another institution, and I started there in 2018, in fall of 2018, and then you all know the COVID pandemic started in very early spring of 2020, and so I was really only a year and a half into my career, and starting out in the lab it takes a lot of time. You're trying to establish connections, you're trying to get students and train them and all this kind of stuff. And so right about the time that I was ready to have projects take off to the races is when this thing started. A lot of my research was based on face-to-face, in-person stuff, right? And so it just totally messed it up. it kind of destroyed some of these things that I was doing, made it impossible, and it took so long for things to get back going that a lot of stuff just never happened. And then, moving institutions, the challenges are to some degree starting over again. So the interesting thing, though, is that this creates a lot of space for opportunity. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll tell you all about what kind of consistent research program that I have, that I'm continuing. We're actually doing my thesis group, continuing on with that. But there are other things that I'm going to mention here that are possibilities. They're things that are fleshed out to varying degrees. Ones that are just like, hey, this is an idea that can happen, and this one's like, hey, we're pretty close to doing this. Just to kind of let you know other stuff. So this is going to include consistent research as well as new and interesting opportunities that may arise. So we're going to talk quickly about my research. It's about trying to understand ADHD and social functioning better. That's my kind of basic science research program. And then I also have an intervention research program that is ongoing. It started when I was an intern at WVU in Charleston, and that also got kind of messed up with COVID. We were doing in-person intervention groups, and it messed up our study. It stopped our data collection. We had an incomplete data set, although we are publishing a brief report based on that data right now. But we are now shifting to using technology and doing things via Zoom, so kind of using the pandemic as a way to push forward the field. But this is all about parent training, so how we help folks with ADHD, parents and kids with ADHD, parent their children better. And then this is one of the newer areas, and actually something that has been percolating for a while, is leveraging an ongoing relationship I've had with the Outdoor Adventure program in Western North Carolina, which is actually not far from here, up in Waynesville, so a little bit west of Nashville. Yeah, it's a great place. So we'll talk a little bit about that. It has to do with ADHD, learning differences in the outdoors, and whether or not that is something that can offer legitimate benefit to this population, or if it's just a general effect on people, or if it's placebo. Okay? And then lastly, a very new potential line of research has to do with resilience. Can we impact and prevent psychological distress? And so this is a collaboration with my former colleague or supervisor at Appalachian State University and Charlotte Fire Department. So let's jump in. So we'll start with the theory part of this. And really what I'm interested in is social functioning. And this is because social functioning, friendships, being able to get along well with other people is really, really important. When you have social connection, when you get along well with other people, when you can successfully navigate the social context, it's good. It's good for you your mental and physical health. However, when you have the opposite, when you cannot do that as well, when you struggle with friendships, when you experience loneliness, isolation, bullying, victimization, these sorts of things, it is bad for you, right? To the point where people who are lonely and disconnected die earlier. That's how important this thing is for us. And so when I got into this, I had this question, so what is it that allows us to do this? What is it at the cognitive level that allows us to get along well with other people? And what is it at the cognitive level that is impaired that leads to problems? And this is where my research in ADHD comes in, is because this is a group that tends to have difficulties, especially when they're younger, with social interaction. And earlier on in my career, I came across a pretty comprehensive theory of executive function, the executive function system, that suggests the reason why we have this skill and this kind of very important part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that houses these skills primarily, is because it is the thing that allows us to function socially. That is one of the many things that as humans sets us aside from other organisms, and that successful social interaction is incredibly adaptive, and that's the reason why we have this. And so the executive system includes a lot of different skills, a lot of times distinct but related things like inhibition, working memory, the ability to stop provoke responses, the ability to hold in things in short-term memory, manipulate it for some sort of goal or outcome, and several other things. And a lot of the past research has supported this idea that they're related, that executive function is correlated with social function. Right? So greater problems in executive skills, greater social impairment, and this again is what we find our kids with ADHD. That further supports this connection is that folks with ADHD tend to have greater deficits in executive function, some particular ones like working memory and inhibition, and they tend to have greater social impairment, so it kind of fits with the story here. And then there's actually evidence that there are other things going on here, things that we call mediators, or other constructs that kind of play into this relationship, such that these kind of core skills lead to kind of manifestations in attention, hyperactivity, that are the things that then lead to social problems, right? And so, you have models that look a little bit like this, where you do have a connection between executive function and social problems, but you also have these mediating behavioral manifestations, right? I call this is an ongoing problem that noises are just like drilling into the floor. So the question becomes like, what's missing? So there's a lot of research out there, there's correlation research that says these things are related. Well, there are actually several things that are yet to be known in the research. The first is that, is this a causal connection? Pretty much all of this research, with the exception of my dissertation, actually, is correlation. And so my dissertation set out to try to understand, is there a causal connection through experimental manipulation? And then the other one is that, when we talk about executive function, that's a really complex, extremely complex thing, right? So you need to be more systematic. You talk about social function, holy cow, it's arguably even more complex. This is only one model of social processing called social information processing model by Crick and Dodge that you can see here has at least 6 distinct aspects to it. And so in order to do a really good job, understanding this, you have to start breaking it down and starting the examination in a systematic way, which is what I decided to do with encoding of social cues. And given that this is very complex and that there's all these small components to it, these relationships that you're going to try to understand are probably pretty nuanced. They're probably pretty small but meaningful. And so what that means is that from a research standpoint, you have to have a lot of people to build study. You need to have big sample sizes so that you can magnify the relationship to be able to understand what's going on there. So looking in big or dimensional samples is important. So that's what one of the things that I'm going to be doing here at Walker is continuing this approach. And I'm doing it through an experimental design known as the dual task approach. And the idea behind a dual task is that cognitively, we have limited resources, right? Kind of like attention is limited. When you divide your attention, you're simply dividing it out and doing each thing that you're trying to do less well, right? And so the same thing is true for any area of the brain that is used to do the same type of task. So if social functioning, or in this case social encoding, is based in the sort of part of the brain that we're working memory is based in. If you try to do social encoding and working memory at the same time, they're going to interfere with one another. And then you can manipulate it up and down to see how it impacts. And so you do kind of this task, you do a task where you're doing a encoding task while at the same time doing a working memory task. And what we use in this study is the NMAP. Listen to letters in your earphones, and then you have to respond to those letters based on some rule. And so we're continuing this. Actually, my thesis students are already collecting data. We've already got 10 to 12 folks who have been run with this, where we're going to be looking just a broad sample of folks. We're hoping this semester to get 60, and the goal being over several semesters to get closer to 150 to 200 participants run. So that we can look at what happens when you load working memory, what happens when you look at other variables that might moderate this impact, or do folks with higher attention problems experience greater difficulty when they increase working memory, things like that, kind of more of those nuanced questions that try to get at what's going on with the relationship between cognitive skills and social outcomes. Also going to try to do that, kind of expand this into additional areas of cognition, so using something called complex span, which is another kind of working memory type task that is, some people argue is a more appropriate measure of working memory. Some people argue it's just a different facet of working memory. But to, again, try to get a fuller picture. And so complex span is where you are remembering letters, while in between the letters you have these distracted tasks of engaging in mental math. So this would be operation spans. You have a G, you have to remember that, then you have to do, you say 5, the next one says +2, you say 7, you say -1, and you have to take 7 minus 1, which is 6. You have to hold the information in memory, and then it tells you the next letter. And so it's a much more complex working memory task that kind of loads it to a greater degree. So what would the new task look like if you use complex span rather than just the NMAP task? And then one thing I'm actually really interested in doing is a more naturalistic manipulation of working memory. And so this would be actually having people come into the lab and loading working memory, or loading kind of the cognitive load, naturally using the social context. So how does a dyadic task, like a collaborative cognitive task, how does that impact someone's ability compared to a group task, where you're having to hold more information into the multiple people that are kind of providing kind of social information. So this is kind of something that's been done as some colleagues down in Forest State, Florida International University, that have started doing this. It's really, really cool, where you're kind of creating these new and very interesting paradigms of trying to understand these relationships that are less laboratory-based, more kind of like, this is how it actually in the real world. If kids with ADHD have social problems, it's not when they're sitting in front of a computer trying to remember letters. It's when they're in groups trying to accomplish some realistic social task. So how can we replicate that? So seeing things that undergrads might be able to do if they were engaging in this research is help develop these kind of interesting experimental studies. I've kind of fallen in love with experimental research, even though I'm a clinician, because it's such a creative process. You can really dig into the literature and find very interesting ways to get at some of the questions that you have. We might, in the future, use neuropsychological tasks, so students could learn some of these, which might benefit them for things like real-world skills, graduate school applications, stuff like that. So this is an example of a neuropsychological task called the Tower from the Way, or the Tower task, that taps into planning and organization. How do you move these from here to here, moving one disk at a time, never putting a larger disk on top of a smaller disk? Can you do it in the most efficient time? Other training on clinical assessments, running lab-based studies, and possibly recruiting from the community. These are some things that's kind of let's keep it going on. We'll do some kind of questions at the end. So take some notes if you have any questions. I want to make sure to get through. That part takes the most time out of all this. So on the intervention side of things, I have been studying ADHD intervention for the past 8 years or something like that, and continuing to look into what can we do to help improve outcomes for kids with ADHD. And we looked at literature. There are really only two supported or kind of well-established treatments. One is medication, Adderall, Ritalin, those sorts of things. And then the second is behavioral interventions, so parent training, classroom management, and things like that. And actually, the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that early on, behavioral intervention is the first line of defense. This rarely happens, and I'm sure you can imagine why. But this is the first recommendation. At 6 to 12, it's either, but preferably both. And 12 or later, it's medication, but also preferably both. And so behavioral therapy, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't give words about medication, because that's not one of my training is. And so I'm going to try to contribute to the field in the way that I can, which is trying to improve outcomes for behavioral therapy. Most parenting programs focus on a few ingredients, like relationship between the child and parents. You got kids with behavior problems. The relationship often suffers because the parents are always on them. They're always putting them in timeout. They're always punishing them. And so then it becomes a really negative relationship. So the first thing you do is you stop that behavior cycle and help them to kind of be on the same page, because the other stuff doesn't work. It doesn't tend to work if you don't have that. Effective reinforcements, and how can we reward the behaviors we want to see, and how can we effectively punish or reduce the things we don't want to see. And so downplaying physical punishment and kind of yelling and stuff, so spanking, yelling, those don't work. How can we do it effectively? Providing effective discipline skills like effective use of timeout, work chores, stuff like that. The takeaway here is that this stuff works. That's not a question. There literally is no question that behavior therapy is effective. It's a good, helpful treatment for those with ADHD and behavior problems. So the question becomes, so what do we do? Who cares? Are we done with this? Well, no. I mean, we can make it better. If you look at the literature, it's based on averages. Not everybody benefits. Some people benefit better than others, and some people actually don't benefit at all. They get worse. So what can we do to make it better? Questions that still remain. What are the most important parts of treatment? Are there things that we do in our treatments that aren't really necessary, that we kind of just throw out because they don't really add any incremental utility or anything else? Can we do it more efficiently? Meaning, do we need 8 sessions? Do we need 12 sessions? Do the sessions need to be an hour long? Do we need to meet every week? Right? Is there a way to make it more economical, essentially, more efficient? And then, can we do it more effectively? This is, who are the people that don't benefit? What are the barriers to getting treatment? All these sorts of things. So these are the questions that still exist and really need to be examined further. And so here, students might actually have an opportunity. This is something that probably will be a year or two from now until it really gets going, because this stuff takes a long time to build the foundation of, but could potentially get involved in actually ongoing parent training intervention. So my colleagues up in Charleston, West Virginia are doing this, continuing to do this, and the goal is that we would have 2 sites collecting data using the same protocol. And students could actually have the opportunity to become co-leaders, where you are there learning the skills of group therapy and behavioral parent training while it's kind of still under the supervision of myself or potentially somebody else. Another one that actually could be a little bit start earlier is actually helping evaluate a new application, a smartphone application that uses, that's attempting to use what's called JustInTime Intervention. As the name suggests, what this is it's using data in real time to identify critical points of intervention. Rather than waiting for your people to show up every week and say, hey, this week sucked, all these bad things happened. On Wednesday, my child threw a plate. On Friday, I screamed at my child for 15 minutes because I was so upset, right? How can we use real-time data to stop those things from happening before they happen, right? So example, if a parent rates their stress as a 9 out of 10 for 2 straight days, this might suggest that this is a critical point of intervention because they're about to break. They're about to have a kind of a freak out, right? And so they may need a coaching call, where we actually call them in between sessions and say, hey, looks like you're stressed out, what's going on? Let's talk about the skills that we've been talking about. Let's walk through what are the things that we think are leading to your stress. And this is actually one of those things that's getting at more effective treatment, reducing barriers, leading our treatment to be more powerful, have a greater punch in a shorter period of time. So this is actually really cool. This is our application. So we have been working on this for several years now. And we have a computer scientist who has built an application from the ground up for us. This is like the beta testing of it. And so folks in our group will download this on their phone, and we have it for iOS and Android. today what it does is it will prompt them to fill out a brief questionnaire. What's interesting is we actually have here in the corner that if they just like, I feel like I need help, if we click that, it calls us and sets up an appointment for us to talk in real time. So it's actually building insight for the parents of when they need help.
So it's like a little like ADHD 911.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I need help. It's the I need help now button. But otherwise, they would just complete it, and then when it gets to the end, we have built in an algorithm. We have several algorithms, which is basically if they pick this and this for this many days, or if their scores after this over this many days, then they'll get this prompt at the end. If it looks like you're struggling, we're going to call you within 24 hours for a 5-minute check-in. Would you like us to call you, or would you like to schedule an appointment? And then it has the option for tips, where when they're done, it'll go ahead and give them some tips that they can use right here, right now. So really cool. This is like really kind of cutting edge type of stuff that will be kind of rolling out over the next couple of years that students might be able to get involved in. Okay, so the next thing, this is now moving past kind of like a pretty well-established research program to things that I think are really cool and could be potential things students could get involved in. The first is based in a relationship I have with this camp called SOAR, which is in Baltimore, North Carolina, which is right outside of Waynesville. That is a camp that's been around since the 70s for kids with ADHD, learning differences, and autism. And it is an outdoor adventure program that students sign up. They're 2-week to 1-month long summer sessions where you are given a group of students, 2 counselors for every 6 kids, and you go out and you do adventurous stuff. And I kept in touch with these guys. I actually did some consulting, independent consulting for them 2 years ago on their program. And so the goal being to continue this collaboration, this relationship, to start researching what does this stuff do. So we're going to watch a little video here that talks about SOAR and kind of what they believe is happening with their programs and why it's beneficial. I'm going to turn it up real loud so that Mr. Drill doesn't drown us out.
My name is Joseph Geyer. I'm the director for the Academy of SOAR. We're in Seneca, West Virginia, doing rock climbing with the Academy students. SOAR originally started as a summer camp for ADD, ADHD kids back in the late 70s. And has, over the course of the last 40 years, grown into a full-on boarding school for children with learning differences and a postgraduate gap year program for the same type of students.
Did they follow through with Fairmont?
The ADD, ADHD brain, as most people see it, is just all over the place, chaotic. They are easily distractible, but they easily hyper-focus as well. Some of our students, they have no problem, hyper-focusing on a book with maps in it for hours. But if somebody's snapping their fingers over here, that's enough to take them off task if they're doing something that they are not fully invested in.
I'm Zach Mansfield. I'm 18. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I've been at the Academy at SOAR for 3 years. When I first started in the Academy, I was troublesome, to put it lightly. The outdoor curriculum was really helpful. I love the outdoors. It's super fun to do an activity and then learn the science behind the activity, the history behind the activity. It's pretty cool.
1, 2, 3, lean back, straight out.
The adventure piece plays into being successful with ADD, ADHD kids, mainly because it gets them active. And as their body speeds up, I think to a certain extent their brain slows down and they meet somewhere in the middle, the chaos sort of drifts away. I think the nature piece on a larger scale, with the removal of technology and the hustle and bustle of city life or normal life, allows for their brains to sort of relax.
So this is one of those interesting things. I worked for them my summer between my kind of junior and senior year in college as one of their counselors, because I was interested in this, kind of working with this population. And this is maybe one of those things that a lot of people believe that nature is beneficial for people. I think that there are a lot of it. There's kind of like religious or spiritual beliefs behind why that would be the case. There's evolutionary beliefs as to why that might be the case. And there's actually even biological reasons why that might be the case, right? If you're interested, there's a book called Nature Deficit Disorder by a guy named Richard Louv that talks about this idea. And it's kind of those things that, I kind of wonder if they're not onto something. In working at this camp, I saw some pretty significant changes in these kids. Socially, in terms of their confidence, a common thing with kids with ADHD is they lack confidence. They kind of have this pessimistic view about themselves because they're always struggling. They don't do well in school. They're always in trouble. So some kind of these really interesting changes. But to date, not many people have looked at this from a really good scientific perspective. Have designed studies to try to understand, does this have an impact? So one of the things that could be a more immediate possibility is doing some data collection on their summer programs. This is kind of neat because it's a clinical population that's there for kind of the studying because they go to this camp. And then they have these very distinct summer camps where they show up. They have this whole day where they get kind of oriented before they go off to the field, and then they come back to the base camp. And it's a perfect setting for kind of a pre-post follow-up sort of examination of different symptoms. And so this is something that could be that I'm hoping to do pretty soon, potentially even this summer, start doing some data collection in this. Longer term, SOAR is really interested in evaluating their academy. So he's talking about their boarding school now. And it's a very interesting approach to education, where you heard that kid talk about how essentially the things they're doing are integrated into the curriculum so that they're learning about science and history and stuff, but it's about the stuff that they're actually doing, right? So it has that being more interested in it. And so doing some program evaluation in comparison of this with some other things. So this is something that's really neat. That's kind of a newer thing that's coming up that I hope to get students involved. Okay, lastly, this is the last couple things, and then we can chat about any questions you might have. This is a very, very new thing that came about. This summer, I was emailing my former supervisor named Josh Broenfeldt at Plaza State. He's a clinical psychologist that studies anxiety, exercise, and then in the last 10 years or so, he's gotten very interested and involved in studying meditation. Little aside, it's not something I talk about often, but I've actually been studying meditation since I started graduate school in 2014. It's been a consistent research program. This is not something I don't even know if other faculty here know that I study meditation. It's kind of one of those things. It's like almost like a pet project of mine. It's not my main thing, but I've been studying it. So I was talking to him. He's like, "Hey, do you want to become part of this project?" And he was just like, "Hey, we're doing this thing. I've been involved in this project, and now people have dropped out. We need some help. Would you want to be a part of it?" What it is that there was a firefighter in Nashville, North Carolina, who, along with this other kind of more business-minded guy who started a mindfulness business, developed a program for firefighters. He was a firefighter, kind of like a hero firefighter. He pulled people out of burning buildings and saved people in dangerous situations. Kind of this amazing person. And he has not experienced any of these negative effects of it. When you look at this, it's a shocking statistic that firefighters, 17 to 22% of firefighters will meet criteria for PTSD due to regular exposure to traumatic situations. That's compared to at most 8% of the population. Right? So this is a high risk population. We also might do some things like study other forms of kind of anxiety or reactivity, so heart rate variability, other physio measurement, potential for even things like cortisol levels and stuff like that. And one thing about what they're doing is they're doing the trainers model, or what they're going to do is they're taking 25 kind of leader firefighters and they're going to train them in this program. And then it's those folks that are then going to go train the other firefighters. So they have this inherent buy-in, like it's not some random hippie with dreadlocks that's teaching them mindfulness. It's like this guy that I look up to and I trust and I care for, right? And so this is something that's very, very new. It's still in the works. It's kind of slowly building, but in the next year or so, we may start traveling to Charlotte and starting to do some data collection for evaluating this resilience program. So this is really, really cool, very new, that I will definitely need help with. This will be something that a lot of students can get on. All right, so that's all I got for you. These are the things that I'll be studying. Some of these might really become prominent parts of my research program. Some of them may be things that kind of we just tinker with, but this is all stuff that's going on right now. So, do you have any questions? Do you have any thoughts? Do you have, I don't know, anything else you want to talk about? Any of the stuff I talked about?
So is your smartphone app, is it like out in the app store right now?
It's not yet, because we're still, so we still have to there's all this stuff you have to fill in, copyright and like descriptions, and we're just emailing this past week about the name for it, so you have to have a name for it. I think we ended on QDoc, maybe, like Q as in prompting. So it's not yet, but it will be soon.
And how do you plan to get that, what's your target population with that? How are you trying to get that out?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is right now, it will basically be just for us.
Okay.
It'll be on there so that they can go and they can download it, but that no one will be able to access it unless they've been given a username and password by the research team. And so when we're continuing to do our behavioral parenting programs, some people will get this and some people won't. And so it'll be a comparison, kind of like a randomized control trial, a little bit more naturalistic, of those who are getting this kind of adjunctive treatment to the regular behavioral parent training compared to just someone without. And then you can see, are there any incremental benefits to using this application in these just-in-time interventions? So that's how we'll do it at first. The goal being, though, is that we wanted to develop almost like a template for other folks with other interests to use. Because this is something that can be used. You can fill in this idea for any other problem, anxiety, stress, substance use. There's interesting research already on these types of intervention with substance use where, like with the AA model, what they'll do is they plug in somebody's phone or their watch the coordinates for all the bars that they go to. What it'll do is if they get within a certain distance of that bar, it will automatically prompt their sponsor and say, Jeff is near the bar, he might need a call because he might be thinking about going back to training, right? So there are a lot of different ways to use it. So we built this kind of a template platform that we can then use with other folks who are interested in this just-in-time approach to intervention, which I think personally is going to be, if we can kind of figure out what the best way to employ it, it's going to be a kind of shift in how intervention is done in the future. Right now, we're still old school. All our interventions done. People might send you worksheets on the computer, but it's still very much like face-to-face, 1 hour a week or something like that. Things have got to change, and we got to stay on top of this stuff. I'm not at all someone who loves technology. I to some degree wish that we weren't kind of going further and further into technology, but it's an inevitable part of life. And so, finding ways to use it that is beneficial rather than allowing you to control your life, I think is an important part of the future. So as psychologists and mental health professionals, it's going to be an important thing to integrate.
In looking at the executive function and the social function, do you ever look at emotional regulation at all? Do you ever come across that?
I haven't.
Okay.
There's a researcher actually interviewed for his lab when I was going to Black graduate school, who's at the University of Louisville, and he does a lot of emotion regulation stuff. His argument is that it's related to but different from executive function, whereas some people believe that emotion regulation is basically a type of executive skill.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like Russell Harvey is a big ADHD researcher. He suggests that it's a part of executive functioning.
Yeah. I didn't see it up there, that's why I was asking.
Yeah. So that's one of those things. It's kind of like other areas of psychology, like even working memory. Like some people debate that NVAC isn't working memory, right? It doesn't tap working memory. So there's always that, but I do think that it's an important part. I've measured it in some of my past research, just from like a self-report standpoint, but have not been any more direct cognitive measurement of emotion. But I do think it's important. It's kind of part of the model, that whole triangle model, these kind of behavioral manifestations. There's a good bit of research that suggests that it's those things that really are driving the social impairments. If you got a kid who is hyperactive or really emotionally reactive, that's going to be the thing that's going to get turned off to other people socially. So I absolutely believe that it's going to kind of come out in the wash as being an important part of appropriate social functions, being able to manage emotions.
And do you look at like the subtypes as monitors at all?
Of ADHD? Not yet.
Okay.
That's again one of those things that you need a lot of people. And in my dissertation, I think we had predominantly combined type, which tends to be the most common. That's the most common, like in kids, type of ADHD. So we didn't have any ability to look at the subtypes. But you know, there are several meta-analyses that do look at the differences in the subtypes and how the executive skills differ. And so, yeah, that's another great kind of area for future research for sure. Yeah, great questions.
So I'm hoping this question makes sense, like as far as the resilience program goes. So for firefighters, have you like developed like has a certain experimental design been developed for that yet? Or?
So that's the part that's still kind of in development. Like we're at a stage where it's happening.
Yeah.
They are doing it. And the nice thing about it is that we don't have to be the ones delivering the intervention or developing, right? It's already been done, and it's this other kind of company that's going to be doing it. They just want us to study it. So me and Josh have been talking about what we want to do, because they're kind of like, we'll do whatever you want. Like they're leaving it up to us. So you know, we may decide to do. I think what's probably most likely to happen is a weightless comparison design, because everybody's going to get it. Okay? And so what it will probably be is that we will do this kind of lagged sort of design where you have a group that comes in and starts, and so you do the pre-measurement for them, right? And then you also have a group that at that same time, you're going to measure those same variables, but they're not going to get to start the group until 8 weeks or 12 weeks down the line, right? So then you'll measure them again when they start the actual group, and you'll do that repeatedly. And what it gets you is a control group that ultimately gets it. So you get both the control data as well as a large pile of intervention data, and then you can do the comparison. So that's probably going to be what we'll do.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, because like, I mean, I think you would, are you saying you probably, like let them go through this program when they're like not on call? Because when I was thinking, like, you know, firefighters are always on call, you know, they might get a call any minute. So if they're going through this program, they're getting calls, they're having to leave, having to pause the program, you know, how is that going to affect?
Yeah. So I think that it'll be, that because we're doing this in a way that it would be kind of referred to as an effectiveness study. So efficacy is when you kind of control for everything, you know, you can't be in the study if you have depression or a pre-existing diagnosis of PTSD or whatever, right? We're just kind of like taking what we have and trying to run with it. And I think the goal, the nice thing about having firefighters running it is that they will be more aware of like when is a good time to do this, and when can we run groups that's less likely to be impacted. But all those other things, like the number of times they go out on call, or the number of exposures to traumatizing things during the program, with the design approach are going to be washed out. Because the control group, assuming, is going to have probably an equal number of those calls, or we're not going to talk about inducing situations. And so you can see over time, does being in this group protect against the increase of symptoms, the start of symptoms, the ultimate diagnosis of PTSD, PTSD, those sorts of things.
I think it'd be cool to extend your smartphone app ID and totally extend that to like the link to
Absolutely,
for
absolutely,
firefighters.
yeah, absolutely. I'm also really, I'm interested in some of the physio data. Are you guys familiar with a company called Hilton? It's they are big in fitness, but it's like a fitness strap. But the cool thing about it is that, it's like most of these things, it pairs with an app, but it does things like measures your heart rate variability and predicts like whether or not you're overtraining or undertraining. So some of these kind of indicators of chronic stress. I'd love to get that company on board to kind of sponsor the use of these things that can then, you can get in addition to the self-report data and diagnostic stuff, at the biological level, physiological level. Is there improved outcomes for chronic stress? I think there's a lot of opportunity. That's why it's pretty exciting to have like a sample size like that's pretty massive for a big intervention study. And Josh has told me that there are other fire departments that are already interested in it. So it could be a really, it's one of those things that like it might, these things happen all the time. It might kind of even out. Sometimes it happens, but this could be, could ultimately become a really, really big research program that I think would be fantastic if it was true.
Yeah, I mean, because they could maybe go to, police,
Yeah,
like.
for sure. Any of your first responders,
Yeah.
and you can start applying this to emergency room nurses and emergency room physicians, all these people that have jobs where they are likely to be exposed to this stuff, having a kind of approach to those sorts of things that come in life that could be beneficial would be really neat to see. Okay, well, I think it's like time. I don't want to keep any of y'all any longer, but I appreciate you coming. If you have any other questions or anything, you can pop out of the office. I'm in there most of the time. Shoot me an email if you want to talk. If you have any specific questions about the research, shoot me an email, come by. And then, if you're interested in getting involved, let me know as well. Right now, like I said, getting things going is kind of a slow process. But I'm hoping that potentially by spring, I'll at least have some data collection going on with that first kind of area of research in a lab. Right now, it's literally just a thesis group. I don't have a lab at all. I don't even have space because that whole 224 room, we're going to redo it. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of up in there. But if you're interested, let me know. We can chat about what your goals are and how it might fit into